Take your hand off him before I forget I'm supposed to be serving you." The sentence sliced through the glittering Manhattan restaurant so sharply that even the pianist missed a note. 28-year-old Grace Bennett stood beside table 12 with a silver tray pressed against her curvy hip, her white blouse stretched over her full figure, her dark curls escaping the neat bun her manager demanded, and every wealthy face in the room turned toward her. 5 seconds earlier, tech millionaire Preston Vale had grabbed an older stranger by the collar after the man accidentally bumped his chair. "Do you know what this jacket costs?" Preston had snapped, shoving him backward. Grace had spent 6 years swallowing insults from customers who treated waitresses like furniture, and nearly as long hearing comments about how someone her size should dress, eat, smile, or disappear. Tonight, something inside her refused to swallow one more thing. Preston laughed. "You're threatening me? I'm asking you to let him go. And I'm telling you to mind your business." He shoved the stranger again. Grace stepped between them. Preston reached around her, and when his hand struck the older man's shoulder, Grace reacted. Slap. The sound cracked across the restaurant. Silence followed. Grace's face drained of color. Preston slowly touched his cheek. "You just hit a man worth $80 million. Grace's fingers trembled, but she kept her chin raised. "Then you can afford better manners." Someone gasped. Someone else quietly lifted a phone. Grace's manager, Leonard Pike, came rushing across the marble floor looking as if his entire career had caught fire. "Grace, what have you done?" "She assaulted me," Preston said. Leonard didn't ask what happened. He looked at Grace's body, her inexpensive shoes, the coffee stain on her cuff, then at Preston's tailored suit and diamond watch. The decision was already made. "You're fired." Grace swallowed hard. Rent was due in 4 days. Her checking account held less than $300. She had spent the morning ignoring another message from an ex-boyfriend who once told her no successful man would ever choose a woman who looked like her. But she refused to apologize for stopping a bully. "Fine," she whispered, removing her apron. "But check your security cameras before you call me the problem." Across the restaurant, one man had not moved. 36-year-old Luca Moretti sat alone beneath the amber light of a private corner booth, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, one hand resting beside an untouched glass of sparkling water. In New York's criminal underworld, Luca was the Mafia Boss people mentioned carefully and never twice. Wealthy, controlled, and notoriously difficult to read, he had survived betrayals that taught him loyalty was rarer than money. Tonight he had entered the restaurant without his usual entourage because someone inside his organization had been leaking information, and he trusted almost no one. Grace had no idea who he was. More importantly, she had no idea the elderly stranger she had defended was Carlo Russo, Luca's longtime accountant and one of the few men Luca considered family. Carlo had deliberately arrived separately because Luca suspected they were being watched. Preston raised his voice again. "I want her arrested." Grace's fear flashed across her face, but instead of retreating, she moved closer to Carlo. "Sir, are you hurt?" Carlo stared at her, stunned. She had just lost her job, yet she was checking on him first. That was when Luca stood. Conversations died one by one as several men near the bar recognized him. Leonard's expression changed instantly. Preston didn't notice. "Who are you?" he demanded when Luca approached. Luca ignored him. His eyes settled on Grace, not on her waist, not on the curves strangers had judged before learning her name. He noticed her shaking hands and the fact that she still positioned herself between Carlo and danger. "Grace Bennett," Luca said quietly. She blinked. "How do you know my name?" Luca glanced at the name tag still pinned above her heart. For the first time that evening, something almost warm touched his expression. Then Carlo leaned toward him and murmured, "Luca, look at Preston's wrist." Luca did. Beneath Preston's cuff was a black serpent tattoo. The same symbol connected to the men who had been hunting for Luca's financial records for 3 months. His gaze hardened. This was no random argument. Preston had not bumped into Carlo by accident. Grace had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a mafia conspiracy and slapped the man sent to start it. Luca moved beside her, close enough that she could feel the sudden stillness surrounding him. "Mr. Pike," he said, never raising his voice, "you're going to check those cameras." Leonard nodded immediately. Grace stared between them, confused. "And Preston," Luca continued, finally meeting the millionaire's eyes, "you're going to leave her alone." Preston scoffed. "Or what?" Luca's expression remained calm. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you?" Grace looked at Carlo, then at the frightened manager, then back at the mysterious stranger standing protectively at her side. She had thought losing her job would be the worst thing that happened tonight. She was wrong, because seconds later, Carlo whispered the name that made Preston turn pale. Luca Moretti. And Grace realized the stranger she had just defended belonged to the most feared mafia boss in New York. File site turn file row. Grace Bennett had heard the name Luca Moretti before, but only in the way ordinary people heard about storms they hoped would never reach their street. Quietly, carefully, usually followed by lowered voices. Now the man himself stood beside her in the middle of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, calm enough to make everyone else nervous. Grace looked at him, then at Carlo Russo, then at Preston Vale, whose arrogant expression had disappeared almost completely. "You're Luca Moretti?" she asked. Luca's eyes returned to her. "That depends who's asking." Grace folded her arms, still shaken from being fired, still angry enough not to care that half the room looked terrified of him. The waitress who apparently just wandered into something she really didn't need tonight. Carlo gave a surprised laugh. Luca did not. But something shifted in his eyes. Preston stepped backward. "This is a misunderstanding." 5 minutes ago, you wanted her arrested, Luca said. "Now you misunderstand things?" His voice never rose. It didn't need to. Preston glanced toward the exit. 2 men in dark suits had appeared near the doors, not threatening anyone, simply standing there with the patient stillness of people who already knew no one was leaving unnoticed. Leonard Pike hurried back from the security office holding a tablet. "Mr. Moretti, I checked the footage." He swallowed. Miss Bennett was telling the truth. Mr. Blythevale grabbed Mr. Russo first. He shoved him twice. Grace stared at Leonard. "You couldn't check that before firing me." Leonard flushed. "Grace, perhaps we can discuss your position." "No." Luca's single word stopped him. Grace turned sharply. "Excuse me?" Luca looked at Leonard. "You fired her before asking one question because the man accusing her had more money." Leonard opened his mouth. Luca continued, "If she returns here, it won't be because you suddenly discovered integrity." Grace should have been grateful, but irritation rose instead. "I can speak for myself." The entire room seemed to tense. Carlo looked down, hiding another smile. Luca slowly turned toward her. Most people apologized when they challenged him. Grace simply waited. "I noticed," he said. "Good." She removed her name tag and placed it on the nearest table. "Then notice this too. I don't want my job back if I have to pretend what happened was acceptable." Luca studied her for a long second. She expected anger. Instead, he gave the smallest nod. Fair. That unsettled her more than intimidation would have. Preston suddenly moved toward the door. Carlo caught Luca's attention with a glance. Luca stepped aside, letting Preston pass. Grace frowned. "You're just letting him leave?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because frightened men make mistakes when they think they're safe." Grace stared at him. "That sounds extremely illegal." For the first time, Luca almost smiled. "It sounded like observation to me." Outside, rain streaked the restaurant windows and turned the city lights into blurred ribbons of gold and red. Grace collected her coat from the employee room, a thin navy jacket that stopped being useful against October weather 2 winters ago. When she returned, most customers were pretending not to watch her. Luca stood near Carlo while one of his men examined the security recording. The tattoo was deliberate. Carlo murmured, "They wanted us to see it. Or they wanted me looking at Preston," Luca replied. Grace tried walking past them. Luca noticed immediately. "You're leaving alone?" She stopped. "That's usually how leaving works. Preston may have followed Carlo here. And you stepped between them. That makes you visible." Grace's expression changed. Visible to whom? Luca did not soften the truth. People you don't want noticing you. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "So because I helped someone, I'm in danger?" Carlo looked guilty. Luca's jaw tightened. "Possibly. Fantastic." Grace pulled on her coat. "I lose my job, slap a millionaire, discover the mafia exists outside bad television, and now someone might follow me home." "You're not going home alone." "I'm absolutely going home alone." Luca moved closer, but he didn't touch her. That restraint registered with Grace. He was a man accustomed to obedience, yet he left several feet between them. "Grace, I'm not asking you to trust me." His voice lowered. "I'm asking you to trust that whoever sent Preston may be worse." She looked into his face, searching for manipulation. What she found instead was something colder and stranger. Genuine concern. "One ride," she said. "Your driver takes me home. Nobody comes upstairs. Nobody starts deciding my life because I slapped the wrong rich guy." Agreed. 10 minutes later, Grace sat in the back of a black SUV while Luca occupied the seat across from her. She had expected him to send a bodyguard. Instead, he came himself. Manhattan moved outside in wet flashes. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Luca noticed Grace rubbing her wrist. "Are you hurt?" "No." She covered it automatically. His gaze sharpened. "That wasn't from tonight." Grace froze. A faint bruise sat beneath her sleeve, left 3 days earlier when her former boyfriend, Derek Cole, had grabbed her outside her apartment after she refused to lend him money. She hated the idea of explaining it. "It's nothing." Luca's expression turned very still. "Nothing doesn't leave fingerprints." Grace looked toward the window. "You don't know me." "No." "Then don't investigate me." Luca held her gaze. "I won't." She clearly hadn't expected that answer. "Really?" "You asked me not to." Something in her shoulders loosened. Then the SUV slowed. Luca's driver spoke quietly from the front. "Sir?" A dark sedan had stopped across from Grace's apartment building. Its headlights were off. Luca looked through the rain-streaked glass. A man inside lifted a phone and took a photograph of their vehicle. Grace saw the flash. "Is that one of yours?" she whispered. Luca's face hardened. "No." The sedan sped away. Luca immediately reached for his phone, but Grace grabbed his sleeve before thinking. "Wait!" He looked down at her hand, then back at her face. Grace pointed toward her apartment entrance. Wedged beneath the front door was a white envelope. Her name had been written across it in thick black ink. Luca exited first and motioned for Grace to stay behind him, but she followed anyway. He removed the envelope carefully and opened it. Inside was a single photograph taken less than an hour earlier. It showed Grace standing between Preston and Carlo inside the restaurant. Across the bottom, someone had written 6 words. "You should have stayed out of it." Grace went pale. Luca looked at the picture, then at her. The cold mafia boss who trusted almost no one made a decision he had not expected to make that night. "You're not staying here." Grace shook her head. "Luca, someone found your home before we did." His voice was controlled, but anger burned beneath it. "This stopped being about a restaurant the moment they wrote your name." Grace stared up at him beneath the cold rain, frightened but refusing to collapse. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" Luca removed his heavy black coat and placed it around her shoulders without touching anything more than the fabric. "Somewhere they can't reach you." But as Grace pulled the coat closer, she noticed something inside the envelope Luca had missed, a tiny photograph tucked behind the first one. She pulled it free, and her breath caught. It was a picture of Luca taken years earlier, standing beside a woman whose face had been violently scratched out. On the back were 4 words that made even Luca Moretti go silent. Ask him who betrayed her. File site turn file 0. Luca Moretti stared at the old photograph until the rain dripping from his hair reached the collar of his shirt, and for the first time since Grace Bennett had met him, the Mafia Boss looked less dangerous than haunted. "Who is she?" Grace asked. Luca took the photograph from her carefully. "Someone who died because she trusted the wrong person." "That doesn't answer my question. My sister, Sophia." The name seemed to cost him something. Before Grace could ask more, Luca folded the photograph into his pocket and scanned the dark street. "We leave now." Grace hated being ordered around, but the threatening envelope beneath her apartment door had changed the argument. 20 minutes later, the SUV passed through iron gates surrounding Luca's estate outside Manhattan, a sprawling stone house hidden behind tall trees and security cameras. Grace stared through the window. "You live here?" "Sometimes." "That is the least normal answer you could have given." Carlo chuckled from the front seat. Luca almost smiled, but his expression hardened when another vehicle approached behind them. Security lights flooded the driveway. Luca's men moved immediately, then relaxed when they recognized the car. A tall, elegant woman in a cream coat stepped out before her driver could open the door. Vanessa Laurent walked toward them with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to her. "Luca," she said. Then she saw Grace wearing his black coat. Her smile vanished. "Who is this?" Grace started removing the coat, but Luca stopped her with 2 words. "Keep it on." Vanessa noticed. So did everyone else. "Grace Bennett," Luca said. "She's under my protection tonight." "Protection?" Vanessa looked Grace over slowly, her gaze lingering just long enough to make the judgment obvious. "You're bringing restaurant employees home now?" Grace had heard prettier versions of the same insult for years. She straightened. "Apparently the restaurant's customer service has become extremely ambitious." Carlo coughed to hide a laugh. Vanessa's face tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "No. Vanessa Laurent. My family controls businesses Luca needs, and tomorrow evening our families are announcing an alliance." Grace glanced at Luca. "Congratulations." The word came out colder than she intended. Luca noticed. "There is no engagement." Vanessa's smile returned, thin and sharp. "Not yet." Grace suddenly felt foolish standing there in Luca's coat. "I need somewhere to sleep, not a front row seat to whatever this is." She stepped toward the house, but Luca followed. Inside, warm amber lights softened the enormous foyer. Grace stopped near the staircase when Luca's security chief, Adrian Cross, approached holding a tablet. "We traced the sedan outside Miss Bennett's building," Adrian said. "Registered to a shell company connected to Preston Vale." Grace's stomach tightened. "So Preston sent the photograph?" "Maybe," Luca replied. "It's too obvious." Adrian swiped the screen. "There's more. Someone transferred $25,000 into Miss Bennett's bank account 40 minutes ago." Grace stared at him. "What?" Luca's eyes sharpened. Adrian turned the tablet around. The transfer was real. The memo contained only 3 words: payment for information. Grace's face went white. "I've never seen that money." Vanessa stepped closer. "How convenient. I didn't take anything. A waitress suddenly appears, attacks the exact man connected to Luca's enemies, gets invited into Luca's vehicle, and then receives $25,000. Vanessa looked at Luca. "You can't seriously believe this is coincidence." Grace's humiliation burned hotter than fear. She turned to Luca. "Check everything. My phone, my account history, whatever you need." Luca watched her. "I don't need your phone." "Why?" "Because if you were working for them, you wouldn't have stepped in front of Carlo without knowing who he was," Val laughed softly. "That is your evidence?" "No," Luca said. "Her behavior is." Grace looked at him, stunned. Hours earlier, Leonard had condemned her without asking one question because Preston had money. Now, one of the most suspicious men in New York was refusing to do the same and interrupted. "Sir, there's another problem." He enlarged a security image from the restaurant. It showed Preston near the kitchen corridor 20 minutes before the confrontation. Beside him stood a man wearing a waiter's uniform. Grace leaned closer. "I know him." Luca turned. "Who?" "Derek Cole." Her voice connected. "My ex-boyfriend." The room went silent. Luca's gaze dropped immediately toward the bruise on her wrist. "He did that." Grace didn't answer, which answered everything. Luca's jaw tightened. "What does Derek want?" "Money. Control. Whatever he thinks I still owe him." "Could he access your apartment?" Adrian asked. Grace hesitated. "He used to have a key. I changed the lock 2 months ago." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Or perhaps she's giving us a convenient villain." Grace finally turned on her. "I lost my job tonight because I defended a stranger. Someone followed me home. Someone put money in my account to make me look guilty. I'm exhausted, terrified, and still standing here answering questions. So if you want to dislike me, fine. But don't confuse being wealthy with being entitled to humiliate me." Vanessa went still. Luca looked at Grace with something deeper than curiosity now. Respect. His phone rang. Adrian answered first, listening silently before handing it to Luca. "It's Preston." Luca put the call on speaker. Preston's voice sounded nervous. "Moretti, I want the woman returned." Grace's eyes widened. Luca became frighteningly calm. "Returned? She doesn't belong to you. You don't understand. She has something we need." Grace whispered, "I don't have anything." Preston heard her. "Yes, you do. Ask her what Carlo slipped into her apron before she slapped me." Grace froze. Carlo's face changed. She remembered him stumbling against her during the confrontation, one hand briefly touching the pocket of her apron, the apron she had removed and left on a table at the restaurant. Luca ended the call immediately. "Carlo?" The older man looked ashamed. "I had no choice. Preston was searching me. I hid a flash drive on her." Grace stared at him. "You used me? I thought you'd walk away before anyone noticed. Instead, I slapped him." "Yes." Carlo swallowed. "And now they think you have it." Luca stepped toward Grace, but she backed away, hurt replacing fear. "You knew I might be involved because of him, and you brought me here without telling me everything." "I didn't know about the drive." "But you knew there were secrets." Before Luca could answer, every light in the mansion suddenly went black. An alarm began screaming through the darkness. Adrian reached for his radio. Outside, headlights swept across the gates. Then Luca's phone illuminated his face with a new message from an unknown number. He read it once and looked directly at Grace. "What does it say?" she whispered. Luca turned the screen toward her. "We have the waitress's mother. Bring the drive before midnight." Grace stopped breathing, and beneath the message was a photograph taken only minutes earlier of her mother sitting frightened in the back seat of an unfamiliar car. "File site tone file 00. Give them whatever they want." Grace's voice broke through the screaming alarm as emergency lights flooded Luca Moretti's mansion in deep red. She stood frozen beneath the staircase, staring at the photograph of her mother on Luca's phone. "Grace," Luca stepped toward her. "Listen to me. They have my mother, and panicking gives them exactly what they want." She looked up at him, eyes shining with fear. "Easy for you to say." Luca stopped. He could command armed men with a glance, but he seemed to understand that Grace needed something different. He lowered his voice. "You're right." That answer caught her off guard. "So tell me what you need." Grace swallowed. "I need her alive." "Then that's what we do." Adrian Cross hurried in from the security corridor. Power was cut remotely. Backup systems are online. The message bounced through several numbers. Carlo Russo looked sick with guilt. "This is because of me." "Then start talking," Luca said. Carlo hesitated before pulling a chair from the dining room and sitting heavily. "The flash drive contains transaction records. Names, offshore accounts, payments. Someone inside your organization has been selling information to the Veil network for almost 2 years. Luca's face hardened. Who? I didn't know until tonight. Carlo looked toward the old photograph in Luca's hand. The same accounts appear in records connected to Sophia's death. Silence swallowed the room. Grace remembered the scratched-out face in the photograph. You said your sister died because she trusted the wrong person. Luca's eyes stayed on Carlo. I believed a rival family betrayed her. Carlo shook his head. Someone closer arranged the meeting that exposed her location. Vanessa Laurent, still standing near the foyer, went pale. This is ridiculous. Grace noticed it immediately. Not anger, fear. Why are you scared? She asked. Vanessa's eyes snapped toward her. I'm not. Grace stepped closer. You were insulting me 5 minutes ago without blinking. Now Carlo mentions Sophia, and you look like you've seen a ghost. Grace, Vanessa warned. No. Grace's fear was still there, but something stronger had risen beside it. My mother is in a car somewhere because somebody thinks I have that drive. I'm done being quiet to make powerful people comfortable. Luca's gaze moved to Vanessa. Answer her. Vanessa stiffened. My father knew Sophia, that's all. Adrian's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, then looked sharply at Luca. Sir, we recovered part of the restaurant footage from an exterior camera. He turned the tablet around. The grainy video showed Derek Cole entering through the service entrance. 30 seconds later, another figure appeared. Vanessa. Grace stared at her. You were there before you arrived at Luca's house. Vanessa backed away. I can explain. Do it quickly, Luca said. Vanessa's confidence finally cracked. Derek contacted my father weeks ago. He said Grace worked at a restaurant Preston used for meetings. We only needed her schedule. Grace recoiled. You gave them my schedule? I didn't know they would take your mother, Vanessa shouted. I thought Preston would pressure you into carrying something out of the restaurant. Then Luca would find it on you and stop trusting you. Grace stared at her in disbelief. You tried to frame me because you thought I was a threat? You don't understand what our families have invested in this alliance. Luca's voice turned colder. There is no alliance anymore. Vanessa looked at him. You would destroy years of business over a waitress. Luca stepped beside Grace. No, I'm ending it because your family targeted an innocent woman to manipulate me. Grace looked at him, surprised by the distinction. He wasn't choosing her as property. He was choosing what was right. Suddenly Grace's expression changed. Wait, everyone turned toward her. The apron. What about it? Carlo asked. I didn't leave it on the table. Grace closed her eyes, replaying the moment Leonard fired her. I took it into the employee room. I shoved it into my locker before I grabbed my coat. Carlo stood. Then the drive may still be there. Luca immediately looked at Adrian. Secure the restaurant, already calling. But Grace shook her head. There's something else. Derek knows my locker combination. Luca's jaw tightened. Then he may have the drive. No. Grace suddenly remembered something. 3 weeks ago my locker jammed. Maintenance replaced it. I changed the combination and never told Derek. Hope flashed across Carlo's face. So the drive is still there. Luca checked the time. 10:47 p.m. 73 minutes until midnight. We retrieve it, copy the evidence, then use it to get your mother back. Grace reached for her coat. I'm coming. No. Luca, they're looking for you. Exactly, and my mother is the one paying for it. She stepped close enough that only inches separated them. You said you noticed I could speak for myself. Don't stop noticing now. Luca stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. You stay beside me. Not behind you? Beside me. For the first time all night, Grace felt something other than helplessness. Luca reached up, noticed a tear sliding down her cheek, and paused as though asking permission without words. When she didn't pull away, he gently wiped it with his thumb. We'll bring her home. The tenderness lasted only a second before Adrian interrupted. Sir, incoming video. Luca's phone lit up. Grace's mother appeared on screen, frightened but unharmed. Behind her stood Derek Cole. "Grace," Derek said into the camera, "you always wanted someone to choose you. Let's see if the great Luca Moretti thinks you're worth losing an empire." Then another man stepped into frame. Carlo gasped. Luca went completely still. Grace looked between them. "Who is that?" Luca's voice became barely audible. "The man who told me Sophia was dead." The stranger smiled into the camera. "Hello, Luca." Luca's hand tightened around the phone. "Uncle Victor." And suddenly, Luca understood the truth. The betrayal had never come from a rival family. It had been sitting at his own table for years. Filesight turned file. "Your uncle?" Grace whispered. Luca Moretti did not answer immediately. He stood in the red emergency light of the mansion foyer, staring at the frozen image of Victor Moretti on the phone screen, as if 20 years of memories had just rearranged themselves into something ugly. Carlo Russo lowered his head. Adrian Cross swore under his breath. Vanessa looked as if she wanted to disappear. Grace, however, stepped closer to Luca. "If Victor betrayed Sophia, then this isn't just about my mother." Luca finally looked at her. "No, it's about destroying everything he thinks belongs to me." Grace held his gaze. "Then don't give him what he expects." That pulled him back into focus. "What do you mean?" "He expects you to choose your empire over one waitress and her mother. He wants me scared, you angry, and everyone divided." Grace pointed toward the phone. "So we do the opposite." Luca's eyes narrowed, not dismissing her now, but listening. Adrian checked the time. 11:02 p.m. We have 58 minutes. Luca turned instantly. "Carlo, with me. Adrian, lock down every route between here and the restaurant. Nobody touches Grace without her permission." Then he looked at her. "Still coming?" Grace lifted her chin. "Beside you." By 11:17, Luca's SUV stopped behind the restaurant. The building was dark except for the kitchen security lights. Grace led them through the staff entrance, her heartbeat pounding harder with every step. The same hallway where she had been fired less than 2 hours earlier now felt like the center of a war she never asked to join. Luca stayed beside her, close enough to protect, far enough not to control. "Locker 17, she whispered. They reached the employee room. Grace spun the dial. Once, twice. The door opened. Her apron lay inside. She reached into the pocket and pulled out a tiny black flash drive. Carlo exhaled. "That's it." A slow clap came from the doorway. Derek Cole stood there. Grace froze. 2 men flanked him, but Luca's attention never left Derek's face. "You put your hands on her," Luca said quietly. Derek smiled. "So she told you." Grace's jaw tightened. "I didn't have to." Luca glanced at the bruise on her wrist. "You left evidence." Derek's smile faded. "Grace, give me the drive. Your mother goes home. You expect me to believe you? You used to." That hurt, but Grace did not shrink. That was before I understood the difference between being loved and being controlled. Derek stepped forward. Luca moved instantly between them. "Stay where you are." Derek laughed. "There it is, the powerful Mafia Boss protecting the poor little waitress." Grace stepped out from behind Luca. "No." Everyone looked at her. "He's standing with me. There's a difference." Luca glanced sideways at her, and something warm passed through his expression despite the danger. Derek's phone rang. Victor's voice came through the speaker. "Enough. Bring the drive to Pier 46 by midnight, Luca, or Mrs. Bennett disappears." Grace went pale, but Luca took the drive from Carlo and inserted it into Adrian's laptop. "Copy everything." Victor heard him. "You think you have time?" "I think you made one mistake," Luca said. "You assumed Carlo kept only one copy." Victor went silent. Carlo looked confused for half a second, then understood the bluff and said, "3 backups, actually." Grace almost smiled. Derek realized what was happening and lunged for the laptop. Grace moved faster. She grabbed the metal serving tray from the counter and slammed it down in front of his reaching hand, blocking him. Adrian restrained Derek before he could recover. Luca looked at Grace. "Remind me never to underestimate a waitress with a tray." You're learning. At 11:31, the files finished copying. Adrian's face changed as he scanned the records. Sir, payments from Victor to Preston, Derek, and 3 of our own men. There's also a location log attached to tonight's transfer. Luca stepped closer. Where? Pier 46 Warehouse District. Grace exhaled sharply. My mother. Luca closed the laptop. We go now. Carlo objected. Victor will expect you. Good. Luca looked at Grace. You stay in the vehicle when we arrive. She stared at him. We agreed beside you. Beside me until bullets become a possibility. And if my mother is inside, then I bring her out. Grace's eyes filled. Luca, I cannot sit in a car while someone decides whether she lives. He looked at her for several seconds. Then, instead of ordering her, he gave her a choice. Stay with Adrian until the building is secured. After that, you come to me. Agreed? Grace nodded. Agreed? At 11:49, they reached Pier 46. Cold wind rolled off the Hudson. The warehouse ahead glowed beneath harsh white lights. Victor stood inside with Grace's mother seated beside him, frightened but unharmed. Preston Vale was there too. Luca walked through the open doors alone. 11 minutes, Victor called, always punctual. Luca held up the flash drive. Release her. Victor smiled. First you sign away control of the Moretti companies, every legitimate holding, every account. You walk away with the waitress, and I keep the empire. Luca did not hesitate. Done. Hidden behind a shipping container, Grace heard him and stared in disbelief. Victor laughed. You would lose everything for her? Luca's answer carried across the warehouse. Everything I own can be rebuilt. He looked toward Grace's mother. People cannot. Grace covered her mouth, fighting tears. Victor's smile vanished. Then perhaps you really have become weak. No, Grace said. She stepped into the light before Adrian could stop her. Luca turned sharply. Grace. She kept walking until she stood beside him. You wanted proof he chose me? She said to Victor. You have it. Now here's mine. She held up Adrian's phone. On its screen were copies of the financial records already being sent to every Moretti captain and attorney connected to Victor's network. Victor's face drained of color. What did you do? I made sure the truth doesn't disappear if you hurt anyone. Preston backed away. Carlo entered behind them with 2 loyal security teams. Victor looked around and realized the room had changed sides. Then Derek appeared from a rear door, having somehow escaped restraint, and charged toward Grace with a weapon raised. Luca moved in front of her. A sharp crack echoed through the warehouse. Luca staggered. Grace screamed his name and caught him as he dropped to one knee. Blood darkened the shoulder of his suit. Victor smiled desperately, believing he had one final advantage. But Grace stood in front of the injured Mafia Boss now, shielding him exactly as he had shielded her all night. She looked at Victor with tears in her eyes and absolute steel in her voice. You wanted to know if he would choose me. She tightened her grip on Luca's hand. Now you're going to learn what happens when I choose him back. File sight, turn file 0. Grace, get down! Luca shouted, but Grace Bennett did not move away from him. She stood between the wounded Mafia Boss and Victor Moretti, one hand gripping Luca's while Adrian Cross and his security team closed in from both sides of the warehouse. Derek Cole tried to raise his weapon again, but Adrian reached him first, knocking it safely away and forcing him to the concrete floor. Preston Vale immediately lifted both hands. Victor looked around at the men who had once feared him and realized none of them were moving to his side. You're choosing him? Victor demanded. After everything his world dragged you into? Grace's eyes burned with tears, but her voice stayed steady. No, I'm choosing myself, and I'm choosing the people who treated me like I mattered. Victor scoffed. You're a waitress. Grace straightened. Yes, and tonight a waitress uncovered what powerful men spent years hiding. Luca looked up at her, despite the pain in his shoulder, and pride replaced the coldness usually carved into his face. Sirens sounded outside. Luca had ordered Adrian earlier to send the evidence through attorneys to the proper authorities if Victor made his move, and now Victor's financial conspiracy was no longer a family secret he could bury. Carlo rushed to Grace's mother and freed her hands. "Mom!" Grace ran across the warehouse. Her mother rose, and Grace wrapped both arms around her. For several seconds, the danger, money, mafia politics, and threats disappeared. There was only a daughter holding her mother alive. "I knew you'd come," her mother whispered. Grace pulled back, crying, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For getting you involved." Her mother touched her cheek. "You defended someone who needed help. Never apologize for having a good heart." Grace looked across the warehouse. Luca was sitting against a crate while a medic examined his shoulder. Their eyes met. She immediately crossed back to him. "How bad?" "I've had worse." "That is not medically useful information." Even the medic smiled. "The wound is manageable. He needs treatment and rest." Grace exhaled. Luca noticed her hands trembling and reached for one. "Your mother is safe." "And you got hurt." "I made my choice." Grace shook her head. "You were ready to give up your entire empire. Buildings, companies, accounts." Luca's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "None of those held my hand when I was bleeding." Her expression softened. Around them, Victor, Preston, and Derek were escorted away while Carlo carried the copied evidence. Vanessa's family alliance collapsed before sunrise once the records exposed their connection to Victor's scheme. But Luca refused to turn the night into revenge. He wanted the truth documented, the innocent protected, and the betrayal finished. 3 weeks later, Grace stood outside the same Manhattan restaurant where everything had begun. Leonard Pike had offered her job back twice. She declined twice. Instead, with restitution from the restaurant and a legitimate investment she had negotiated on her own terms, Grace began planning a small neighborhood cafe where employees would never be judged by the size of their bodies, their bank accounts, or the clothes they could afford. A black car stopped at the curb. Luca stepped out, his shoulder heeling beneath a dark wool coat. "You're late," Grace said, "by 43 seconds. Dangerous habit. I'll work on it." He handed her a small box. Grace raised an eyebrow. "If that contains something ridiculously expensive, open it." Inside was her old restaurant name tag, Grace Bennett. The scratches had been polished away and the edges restored. Beneath it was a simple silver plaque for her future cafe office. Owner. Grace stared at it. "Luca, the first night I saw you, everyone in that room was measuring your worth by the wrong things." He stepped closer. "You were the only person who saw a stranger being hurt and decided his life mattered more than your comfort." Grace blinked back tears. "You noticed all that because I slapped someone?" It was a memorable introduction. She laughed. Luca smiled fully this time, something few people in his world ever saw. "I spent years believing caring about someone gave enemies something to use against me," he said. "You taught me something different." "What? Having someone worth protecting doesn't make a man weaker. Sometimes it reminds him what strength is for." Grace looked down briefly. "I spent years thinking maybe people would choose me if I was smaller, quieter, easier." Luca gently lifted her chin, waiting until she met his eyes. "Then they were asking you to disappear so they could feel comfortable." He took her hand. "I'm not asking you to shrink, Grace." Her tears finally fell. "Good, because I'm done apologizing for taking up space." "Good." Months later, Grace's cafe opened beneath warm golden lights. Her mother stood proudly near the counter. Carlo occupied the same corner table every morning, and Luca Moretti, still feared by enemies and respected by allies, became known inside those walls for something nobody outside would have believed. He always carried Grace's coffee to her himself. On opening night, he stood beside her rather than in front of her, while she turned the sign from closed to open. Grace looked at their reflection in the window, and no longer saw the woman who had been mocked, overlooked, or told she was not enough. She saw a woman who had defended a stranger, faced powerful enemies, protected the man who protected her, saved her mother, and refused to surrender her dignity. Luca slipped his fingers through hers. "Ready?" Grace smiled. "Beside me?" "Always." And that was how one slap that should have cost Grace everything instead revealed a conspiracy, healed two wounded hearts, and brought together a curvy waitress who refused to make herself smaller and a mafia boss who finally discovered something more valuable than power. Someone he could trust with his heart. So what would you have done if you were Grace that night? Stayed silent to protect your job, or stood up for a stranger without knowing who was watching? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional mafia stories about courage, protection, and unexpected love, subscribe to the channel for the next story.